Hello, and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care, and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out about how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie Couch with Jason Watkins. Jason was born in Shropshire and is an actor best known for his diverse performances in TV shows including Being Human, Trollied, W1A, and The Lost Honour of Christopher Jeffries, a role that won him the BAFTA TV award for Best Actor. He's also had a memorable role in the film series Nativity and starred as Prime Minister Harold Wilson in The Crown. Jason lives in London with his wife Clara and is father of 5 children. Well, Jason Watkins, welcome to the Marie Curie Couch.
Very nice to be here. Thank you for asking.
How are you?
I'm very good. I'm here in my kitchen, just so listeners can visualize me if they so wish. I can hear my dog Georgie barking in the front room, but he's all right. So yeah, I'm great.
So Jason, one of the aims of this podcast is to encourage conversations around death and dying and bereavement. What we know from our listeners is that they find it helpful, they find comfort in hearing other people's experiences of loss and grief. So can I start, Jason, by asking if you can tell me about a bereavement you've experienced in your life?
Well, yes. I mean, many of your listeners may know, and many don't, but we've spoken about the loss of our daughter, Maude, to sepsis 12 years ago now. And yes, I mean, she died of sepsis. She died on, it's almost Victorian, really, in a way. She died on New Year's Day, unexpectedly died in the night. We discovered her on the morning of New Year's Day. And we only found out after the subsequent inquest into her death. As there was an inquest because we'd taken her to A&E 2 days in a row and been discharged on each occasion, and her dying in the night was seen to be unusual, which of course it was. But there was no culpability, and the diagnosis was sepsis, which was happening below and behind the presenting symptoms of pneumonia and tummy bug. So that completely turned our lives upside down. And probably is why I'm talking to you today. You know, it's given us a whole new. There's nothing good to come out of it. I don't want to say what has happened. I can sort of make it non-relative. All I can say is it's terrible that we lost Maude, but I can also say we've been doing so much work for charities and for the bereaved and for sepsis awareness and Child Bereavement UK and other charities. So that's happened, which has given us a purpose perhaps beyond just our work. So yeah, that's our story. And it's 12 years ago. And I suppose it's worth mentioning that by the time the podcast comes out, we would have shown our documentary that we made this year about what happened to Maude, which is about trying to have a conversation about death of children, which is incredibly difficult. So we're meeting at a perfect moment, in a way, Jason, that we can talk about, having responded to your question, you know, about having a dialogue about death and about how difficult it is to talk about it. We can also say that it's very important to talk about it, very important to share our stories. And I think this is what our hope is for the documentary, that by sharing our story, we give comfort and context to others, show that they're not alone, and to give an idea to people who have not lost children, to have an idea what it might be like and what we as bereaved parents appreciate. So yeah, that's our story, I suppose. And I also know people who have lost to cancer as well. So a very good friend of ours who was in a group of, I would imagine that this echoes across a lot of people, that there's a group, isn't there, of when usually your eldest child goes to school, primary school, you make friends with those parents. And that's what we've done. And we're still close friends. We've had, 10 more actually. They were a very close term. My daughter Bessie, who's now 15, nearly 16. And we lost one of those, who was 6'5" and an architect, one of the most wonderful people that you're ever likely to meet, and died of cancer. So, that's very hard. And, trying to help his widow and 2 boys, you can't do that sort of thing on your own, can you? You can't. You have to have friends, and you have to have other family members. And other family members, of course, can find things incredibly difficult too. They're trying to put things into context. But yeah, any dialogue about loss and the absence of someone and the comfort that can bring, however, clumsy it might be. We always say, Clara and I, and when I say we always say it, it's not like a mantra. It's whenever we're asked, we give the same answer because it's so important, is that, if someone dies, it's nice to mention them, even if you do it badly, or you feel you've done it badly, or you think, oh God, they're going to be, I've reminded them of their dead child. Well, she's with us all the time. We're not having a great day because we're not thinking about our child. We might be having a great day and laughing, all those things, because we're able to accommodate our child and have her with us. We're in our spirit. So we're then able to have good days, which is important to say, that when you've lost somebody, even in the first few terrible days of trauma, you will at some point come out of that, if that's the right word, or things will change such that you are able to have good days in your life, and you should be able to do that. But somebody sort of think, oh gosh, I don't want to bring them down because I'm going to mention your child, because and that may be the case in other bereavements, not necessarily just with children. You want to know that your person you lost existed, and that they counted, and also that, really simplistically, that they were there. Partly the documentary is a way of celebrating and reminding everybody and ourselves, selfishly, that she was with us, and she counted.
You mentioned those difficulties around conversations. So after Maude died, what were some of the difficulties you and your family faced?
Oh, well, I mean, we fundamentally, in the first few days, you are in a really deep hole. I mean, we didn't get out of bed really. And when you get out of bed, your legs are wobbly. You feel like when we first went outside, you felt like everything was in cotton wool. That saying where everything's wrapped in cotton wool. You're not really hearing properly, and the world's sort of subdued. I mean, if anybody's had an injury and had painkillers, you got a lot of them. It's a bit like that. I've had sort of knee surgery and stuff, and had some pretty, heavy duty painkillers, and you feel a bit like that. You're really foggy, and there are feelings, obviously, of desperation and confusion, and wanting the clock to turn back and time run through again and it not happen. There's guilt, of course, and as a parent, you're feeling that you should have done better. You should have spotted the signs. You should have known more about sepsis. You should have asked them, could it be sepsis? Which again is not, we're not being fair on oneself. How could you? I'm not a medical person, and the medical people did the best they could, at that time, with the information that they had, systems of care they had in place. But what is left with feeling of absence, fundamentally, that's the word I used earlier on. It's something that was there before is no longer there. It's very hard physically, in a physical way. I remember Maude being, she was taken in a special ambulance away from us, and that was very hard. So the actual physical absence and the lack of sensation of holding hands and things like that is no longer exists. And you're wondering, your hand isn't tingling, but there's an absence even in your hand. They're really, really hard things to negotiate, and you're just crying all the time, of course, and trying to support Clara she was so, I mean, everyone's devastated, but it's unfair to go into too much detail, but I mean, she was really desperate, and there were occasions when I was really worried, and I had to help, make her feel a lot better than she was feeling, put it that way. So, there's those things, and there are Bessie as well, who actually found Maude, or she came into our room and said, "I can't wake her," because they shared a room. So you're trying to help that person through while yourself struggling. So it was a really desperate time, and there's no money, wasn't working. As a self-employed person, you don't get the benefits of employed, which I know is in not all corporations do, but most do. And there have been moves, and there's legislation now that companies should give their employees at least 2 weeks paid leave when you lose a child. However, if you're self-employed, I haven't put that extra few grand away because in case my child dies, because I've never thought about it. So that was an issue, and that's difficult. And then you just learn. You just have to learn to try and find a way through. And one of the things, the principal thing, was talking to other people who had lost children. And I continue to do that on a sort of, if I know somebody, like I spoke to someone last week, and I'm speaking to someone this week, who knows, when I get older and I stop acting, well, not who knows, I certainly will be doing that. I'll be doing more of that probably as, I get older and lose even more hair, that I'll be, helping out with people, probably training as well and doing all that. But fundamentally, sharing your story. So the people that I've been speaking to, I can't say who that is, but, they're in the state of, it's only been a few weeks, they're in the place that I've just described. So they're looking at me saying, "I know exactly how you feel. I'll tell you about how we felt." And they'll be thinking, that is how we feel. And I'll also say, that it's like a huge, big red dot in front of you, the grief that you're staring at. It's claustrophobic and desperate. And in time, although it stays in the center of your vision, it does get smaller. And you're able to look around the outside, look after your other children, see the world and laugh at a joke or read a book or, watch the television. So I can say things like that. And because we feel the same way, having lost our child, we are on the same journey, that you're more likely to be believed, or, you will be believed because you're being open and honest with them. And of course, it's not going to be easy. It's a treacherous pathway, but it's not unnavigable. You can do it. So sharing stories is essential, and that really did help us. And we had, other help as well, a bit of help. I mean, I didn't, I'm saying all this. My therapist was talking and listening to other people's stories and stuff. I was on the other end. I've swapped round now in a way, that I received that context and compassion from parents who'd lost their children, whether that was through the slow group. This is, by the way, Surviving the Loss of the World. That group is a group of parents, and some of them lost their children 20 years ago, some 6 months ago, whatever. So I was able to find context and comfort from hearing their stories, and comfort from me being able to express mine to them. So I'm now, in a way, swapped round in that I am telling my story, and for those newly bereaved are, as I've just described, they're getting the comfort from that. However, I'm still a bereaved parent, so I have to make sure I look after myself, which in the documentary, which I hope people will see, you realize, hang about, I'm not actually looking after myself here, too busy helping other people, which is grand, but it's still a continuing process.
And I think just for anybody listening who is grieving the loss of a child. You've mentioned one organisation there, but there's many others, and I think it can be really helpful and beneficial to speak to others who've also lost a child. And the Child Bereavement Network, or a UK organisation, is maybe a starting point as well. But I'm sure people will have local organisations as well to them. I just wanted to ask Jason, I wanted to go back a little bit. You mentioned this before, but so we know that everybody experiences grief in their own way. And that means that even within families, people can experience grief differently. How did you and your family navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'd also, just before I answer that, I'd just also mention the Child Bereavement UK, which is a charity that I support as well, that and UK Sepsis Trust. And that's a good starting point if we're looking for starting points. But yeah, well, it's difficult because if you are grieving, there's certain things that I think that you learn, and people do grieve in different ways, of course, in different, I was going to say different rates, but I don't think there is a rate, weirdly. But you only learn that as it happens to you. And I think the key for me is to listen to yourself and your feelings and as actors, we kind of do that a bit, we're always sort of monitoring in a way. It's an actor's curse in a way, it's monitoring and observing your own feelings because we use them in our work. So we had the benefit of that in some ways. It's letting yourself listen to yourself and let yourself do whatever you feel like doing. Within reason, but, because the 7 stages of grief, I don't quite subscribe to it. I understand, I can, you go, okay, there's acceptance, whatever, there's sort of trauma, whatever they are, and then acceptance, well, okay, fine. But I prefer to have this idea that you kind of observe what you're feeling and give yourself a break and accept that something has happened. So, for example, I went into the shower and had a shower and smashed it up in about the 2nd week because I was so angry at fate, I think it was. I was trying to work out why I was being so angry. And of course, anger is a completely justifiable feeling. And I worked out that I was angry at fate. How has fate dealt us this blow? What have we done? Why, how can you rob a child of her life? All those sorts of things. And it makes you angry. And I didn't do it again, but, it made me think, well, I'm going to have an anger. Anger's going to be around. And I suppose in some respects, it still is. And it comes from that. So I have to recognize that that's around. And then there are times when you're so desperate in the early stages, when it has to be said for people who are newly bereaved, it is trauma. It's a physical trauma that does leave you. It will leave you. But even that is hard letting go, because if you let it go, then somehow you're letting your child go, or the person you're grieving go, because the trauma's going, and it's proof again that they have gone in a very physical way. And that's very hard. But that does sort of happen. And then you might have one day, someone will say something funny. We had a friend who came down, an actress, and she's just sort of real grown up, amongst actors are quite childlike, I suppose. Some would say childish. And she made us laugh. And that happened. And then you might laugh again the next day, or then you might have a few days of not feeling as good, and then a really bad day, and then a really good day, and then 4 quite good days, and then a brilliant day that goes wrong at the end. It's always, the pattern it's like a jazz pattern and not a 4/4 pattern. And it changes, and that's great. That's fine. So when people say, you must feel like this at this point, you should feel like this at this point, then you're going to feel like that. I don't subscribe to it. I think it's really, it's just answering your question, because we all grieve differently. And so much so that when we had a therapy session in our documentary, we did it and was wonderful. Julia Samuel started Child Bereavement UK and is a brilliant psychotherapist and wonderful person who we knew. We realised that Clara and I had slightly different recollections of the day itself. One of the more difficult details of me giving Maude CPR, trying to revive her. I thought I was on my own talking to the person at the other end of the emergency services. But Clara said, no, I was there. I was in the room. And I did remember she was standing in the doorway. So, that's interesting that our recollections were different. And it's kind of just sort of keep an eye on each other if you're a couple and you're at different rates. Also, there's different ways of thinking about Clara's parents and my parents. My dad was very cross with the hospital and wrote letters, and that was what his way of, I think, passed away last year. He was a scientist, and so that was his way. And other people in the family sort of made resolutions and did things that that's another story I can't talk about, but they should change them certainly. And I suppose again, it's like trying to be open, keep an eye on yourself and the people around you. And the main thing is to be kind to yourself and not expect too much of yourself. If you're a man, you can't fix it. There's no way you can go, and I'm being very stereotypical here, and perhaps I shouldn't be, but often men try and fix things. I mean, there are jokes, aren't there, about husbands and wives where, the husband he just wants to fix it when the wife just wants to be heard. I mean, there are different ways of looking at it, but the thing is, you can't expect too much of yourself. Particularly if you lost a child, or when your parents has died, you're allowed. You have the privilege to be, because of the suffering and pain you're in, you have the privilege to be able to be a bit crap at things, not get things right, get them wrong. In our work, sometimes if you've got a whole rehearsal period, you try and get it wrong as many times because then you know what's right. And if you don't know what's wrong, you haven't explored. You've got to explore and be brave. And a lot of that in grief, I think, is about exploring your own feelings and looking around and other people's and talking to them. It's very difficult. Some people don't want to talk. And I can't say that I always find it easy. But I also know that whenever Clara and I touch base and talk about Maude and her loss and making the documentary, however harrowing it was, we are always closer, always. And that isn't always the case with couples. It's hard. Often couples split up. And again, I can understand it's so difficult. It's not about blame. It's not about anything. It might be about the different grieving. I knew this person. He seems to be absolutely fine. Why isn't he feeling these things? So if you don't have conversations around it, you say, well, of course I'm feeling things. I just can't talk about it. Find it too hard. It's like my Uncle Derek or whatever it is, doesn't talk about the war. Why would you share some of those horrible things that happened with other generations? That's his view, but maybe that other generation do want to hear. So, I think that having conversation helps to heal all that stuff, but it's hard. It's always exhausting. Every time we went to slow in the morning, we were lying down in the afternoon. And even like me talking to you now, I'll have to have like an hour just sitting around having a cup of tea, because it's hard, even now, 12 years on, to recollect particularly. But also very rewarding that one is able to pass on some of the experiences and help other people. So.
And I think on that, just some of the key messages you've said. So grief affects us physically as well as emotionally and psychologically. There are theories out there about stages of grief, but actually they're not prescriptive, not just in your experience, but also with every other guest I think we've had on this podcast in 3 years, and everybody I've spoken to in my work, in my years of work in hospice care and end-of-life care and bereavement care, that they're not prescriptive and might not come in the same order. And on that, grief's not predictable.
No.
And I think the other key message, and the big one, which was in my question, Jason, as well, was that it's going to be hard navigating through this with your direct, immediate family, because you're all going to be having different experiences, because grief's unique to the individual. And I think that's easy for me to say, but I think it's one of the hardest things in practice to realize, as you're saying, well, why is he okay today? What, or should, what do you mean you're going back to work? And yeah, I think it's that message of everybody's going to experience it in their own way.
Yeah, and that, and that. Thank you. That was a great summation of what I just spoken about, and also it's good to hear that I'm not alone in my view on that. So particularly about the so-called stages of grief. I took Bessie. So Bessie was 4, and Maude was 2.5. So I took Bessie to a gymnastics group that she went to within the first 10 days, I suppose it was. And at the beginning of each session, they all sat round in a ring with their legs out, like in a sort of what's called a piked position. And just in a ring, like the children that they were, and the coach was telling them about what they would be doing. And I did just think, gosh, she's lost her sister, this little girl down there on these mats. And that was really hard. And she was quite subdued, She was quite quiet, I think, Bessie. And, we were always worried that she would go into herself, not communicate, and not talk about more, not talk about emotions and feelings. Because the horror of it was the trauma of it affected her in such a way. And then we went not long after that to Buckingham Palace. There were lots of photographs, so standing outside Buckingham Palace on a school trip. And that time was so bizarre when I think about it. I can't even remember too much about it, or I was just desperate and trying to do my best for her. And whilst, as I say, trying to read what was on in her mind, and maybe there was a bit of, let's make this better. And you can't really, you have to recognize what it is and try and find a way through. And I suppose that was her way of grieving, was she would be quiet for a bit, but she, then she we talked a lot about it. We always included her. And now she talks about it. Now she's a 15-year-old and a girl, and it's a nightmare. But like all 15-year-olds, I think. But that's good. But she has issues herself, which we are helping her to support her with. And she is getting support for, which directly come out of the loss of her sister. So there is a continual thing. And I'm answering your question again, in a way I'm just showing her that people do grieve in different ways. But, if you're a husband and you listen to now, again, you don't have to solve it. You're probably right. Practically, what can I do? And sorry, I'm probably completely sexist here, but, a lot of women feel that they may feel responsible for the home. They may feel responsible for their work and their home, and wherever they are, I would encourage listening more than telling, I think that's always good. And share, so I feel a bit like this. No, you should do that because you're feeling like that. Well, if you're feeling like that, go and do that. I think that's a simplistic way of doing things. And talking is the best thing that you can do, I think, and not trying to fix things. Let things run their course. And it's difficult because we're all constrained by things we've got to do, work and, all those sorts of things. I have to say, it's quite a gift to be able to read a book, a really good book, and to get some wisdom from it, and then face your own grief. There's a really wonderful book about the death of a child, and it's about their writers writing about the loss of their loved ones, often children. And because they're writers, they're incredibly eloquent, and they do hit home. Go, God, yeah, that's exactly I felt that. And that's an enormous comfort. So things like that I would urge. And I think it is called The Death of a Child. I might actually try and, I've ordered it I think it's sort of out of print, unbelievably. But I've ordered some copies for these 2 people I'm seeing at the moment, and one for myself because I can't find mine. But I remember reading that at the time, for example. That was a good book. It wasn't a self-help book. This is what you do. There are good books that say you may be feeling this, you may be feeling that. That's great. But if you can reach out and speak to someone, they will tell you. And that's, they will tell you. That's always a good thing.
Every 5 minutes, someone in the UK dies without the care and support they need. It's time for change. With your support, we can help more people get the care they urgently need. Visit mariecurie.org.uk/daffodil to donate to Marie Curie's Great Daffodil Appeal today.
You mentioned at the beginning about sort of public's fear around having these conversations like you and I are having now. And I just wondered what some of the reactions were from those around you when Maude died. So I'm not talking about your direct family, her grandparents, her relatives, but actually work colleagues or people you know or neighbours, etc.
Yeah, well, I think we had a neighbour who moved since recent. I remember one of the neighbours didn't really know very well, but they arrived. They were there at the funeral, and that was really that really. I mean, that for a start really meant something. That they, it's a simple thing, isn't it? And I don't need to recommend that. I'm just saying that, and it was very moving and feeling supported, even though we didn't know each other very well. It meant a lot. And then the people who did know very well. My best man was absolutely wonderful, and his family. They're just helping with arrangements, just briefly talking practically about stuff. He was absolutely brilliant because he would say, listen, I've been speaking to, we chose on someone to conduct the funeral and who we were going to use. And he said, well, there's this group and this group. These do this, those do that. Choose between the two. That was it. He was giving me a choice of two things. There's nothing else to think about. He's not this whole array of funeral directors. There was a recommendation from somebody, and so we were able to do that. Then there were other practical things. So he acted as a buffer in a way. There were things like having to tell Clara about the results of the autopsy, things like that, which I obviously I had to do then. There was lots and lots that I did do and had to do, and Clara had to do things as well. But I was a friend there to do some of that practical stuff. So, he said, is it okay if I do this? So you do as much work as you can. I really hope I can do this for somebody one day. You do as much of it as you can. Say, listen, I've looked into this, I've done it, this is how it works. You can do this or you can do that. What do you want to do? Or, think about it. Come back to me when you've got some headspace. So, and then you say, well, look, we need to make a decision about that sort of now. If you can, I think you should do this. And I'll go, okay. Just someone to help, because obviously one's talking to one's partner about it, and, they may not want to know too much, because so much is going on. So that was particularly wonderful. And then our friend Gillian just brought loads of soup, chicken soup, cakes, coming along unannounced, which is all right, actually, because I think Lara's parents were with us. I'm trying to remember, actually, and so there was often somebody with us. And then they would open the door and let them in. So I'd put a cake and they just listen, Ollie and Rebecca are here, or Mark's over Julian. They've brought a cake. Do you want to see them? And okay, yeah. And they come down and sit on the bed and talk and hug and all those things. And they might listen, or, so, and some people, one guy, friends, just sat on the end of the bed and he didn't know. You could tell he just didn't know what to say. He just found it incredibly difficult. And then other people were just there and didn't say much, and you could see that it was fine. We thought, well, no, they didn't know what to say. And there isn't much to say, but the fact that you're there and present helped. So I don't know what the answer is fully, but having somebody with you can help you filter things in a way, or that was practically, it's quite a nice thing. So, and then some people sort of disappeared, but you could say they found it incredibly difficult and impossible. And even now you get letters from people say, I'm really sorry that we got a letter from a lovely guy, and I need to get back to him. It's really bad. A few years later saying, I'm really sorry, I wish I'd spoken to you about it when we were walking our dogs that time. Or I saw you and I didn't come over and talk to you, or whatever, or we met about you, what happened there. And I don't care. I'm sorry he feels bad. He shouldn't feel bad because it's so difficult. But, it's so you can't expect too much of anybody else. Be grateful for those and thank those that are helping, I suppose. That's the thing. Oh, that's really great. Gosh, yeah, thank you. It's making such a difference. And they go, great. And I'll just keep doing it. Some people can see that and others can't. It's an extraordinary situation. And who knows, it might bring up all sorts of feelings of their own grief and, the loss of their parent or whatever it is, or their child, of course. But there might be, difficult histories for them. So, but those people who do, it's great and it's wonderful. And if you are that sort of person who likes doing that and is able to do it, then do.
I think also you've touched on something there with regards to the practical side of things. So, for those listening who know someone who is grieving the death of a child or just grieving the death of anyone, and are fearful or scared about talking with that person or approaching that person or contacting that person because they feel like they don't know what to say, they're left feeling helpless, they don't want to get it wrong, they don't want to upset them, they don't want to say the wrong thing, then actually you don't have to say anything, but what you can do is make some soup.
Yeah.
Or you can do something practical. And that can feel loving and supportive and
absolutely
all of those things as well. And so you don't have to be kind of waving any magic wands. It's just showing up, I think.
Yeah, absolutely right. And again, it's sort of, I think, if you do try and wrap it up in a ribbon and say exactly the right thing, it's going to be difficult. Maybe we'll write a manual one day, I don't know, or things that help, that, practical things. You can, is there anything, can I help with anything practically? Is there any paperwork or is there anything like that I can look at? We had a friend who wanted to have a bench on the heath and she said, I'll do that. She went off and spoke to the Corporation of London. She went through all the process. She did it, and she's bonded with us for life because of that. But things like that, the practical stuff, and in a way, you could say that that's in a way in, isn't it? Because you're starting conversation, is there anything I can do? That might lead you into a conversation.
Totally.
And then you're opening up an emotional conversation. So it's a sort of way, it's sort of saying, I'm available. I'm here practically, and obviously here I am for anything else. And maybe in time, they will listen to you, but listening is the big one, I think. But yeah, soup and cake was food, and go do the shopping. That's the no-brainer, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And looking after the children, I think that happened as well. That Bessie was taken off to friends and started from the head overnight sometimes, and then up at their in-laws, and so there was people who were looking after them. I mean, you could almost say that if you can work things out practically, or if there is something that can be done, which perhaps in other cultures there's more of a template that everybody knows, if that's the right word. But certainly in this country, maybe there isn't that. But maybe, certainly wasn't in our family a religious aspect to it, but there was a lot of love, a lot of working stuff out. And the practical side of it really does happen, because that's something everyone focus on as well. It's a sort of relief from the grieving and a relief from the, we're grieving the right way. When's it going to end? Our lives have completely changed. How are we ever going to continue? The world's still spinning. You go, well, why hasn't it stopped? Why hasn't it stopped? Our child has died. How can it, what people going on a bus there? Why are they doing that? Don't they realise? And I think but it is by increments and little practical things that can help you. Gosh, but you can imagine, things like, what socks am I going to wear today? Or what trousers? I'm just thinking about that now. You think, see, bloody matter what you're going to wear. It's sort of, in a way it didn't, but then in a way it did, because you're then starting to get back into life and starting to be practical. All those things begin to become your new normality. But we keep saying, but practical things are, it's interesting that, isn't it? As not trying to find the best words to say of comfort, other than just giving love and holding them, to just those practical things. It's showing your love, isn't it?
I think you talked earlier, which not many people do talk about, or it doesn't come up very often. But you've just described it there as well with that sort of not knowing what socks to wear or trousers to wear, and that's the confusion that can come with grief as well, and how that can impact. And I think that's linked to that. I just want to I want to ask a couple of more things, Jason, which are sort of slightly off track, but I want to ask one more thing linked to grief, please, if that's okay. And this can be present day or in the past, but what brings you comfort?
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. I think comfort is when, we're all around this table as we were last weekend, on Mother's Day, and there were, 3 generations plus this his boyfriend from another family. And if I'd had my older boys with me from my first marriage to Caroline, I was talking to you before I spoke to you, that would have been even better. But they're the things that bring me joy and comfort. And Clara would say the same thing. My wife would say the same thing. So they bring comfort. As you go, there's some people who love each other and it's complicated, nothing straightforward, but we're all here together. And that brings a lot of comfort. And what else? What was in the football? I wish I read more. I'll keep buying all these books. I'm dyslexic, so it's always, I've got much better at reading. And I suppose, going out to dinner, simple things like that are really great. And spending time with my children is good. And I have to say, I do like work. I'm very lucky that I did a radio play a week or so ago with some people, luckily Jim Gore, Ben, Toby Jones, and, Don Warrington, many people I'd worked before and were with before Mark Frost. And we were a sort of group of, we bump into each other all the time. We're friends, and I'm friends with some of them anyway. But that does give me, I do enjoy my work, luckily, particularly that. It's enjoyable. So that does weirdly give me a lot of comfort, and it does give me purpose, and it satisfies my artistic needs as well, my creative needs. That makes me happy, gives me comfort. And I love cycling as well. So I love sort of hammering away on my exercise bike till I'm, blue in the face. And then I also like going out in the countryside and cycling and stuff like that. That gives me comfort, yeah.
Thank you. So if it's okay, Jason, I'd like to move on to the second part of the podcast. One of our other aims and one of our other messages is what we do know is for people who are living with a terminal illness, for example, that if there are open conversations about death and dying, and again, these can be very practical conversations, then the outcome for those left behind can be different. So that's linked to preparing and preparation. And some of those practical ways of doing that might be writing a will, organizing a funeral, because what happens time and time again is we will have families where someone's died and they're having to manage the finances, the will and the funeral with no conversations having happened beforehand. And they're also trying to manage their grief and their loss. And they're in that early stage, as you talked about before, that you feel like there's cotton wool wrapped around your ears, more of a kind of muffled rather than protected.
Yes. Yes.
So on that, can I ask, do you think about your own death?
I do. And my father passed away in June, and I was in that boat of organising the funeral, and he had made some preparations and a will, etc. and stuff, but hadn't made others. And I have a brother, but he has issues, so it means that I had to do a lot of that, and I found that very hard. And I think, if I'm honest, I'm still not. I've cried once, and briefly, and about the loss of my dad, and I think a lot of that was taken up with me practically doing all those things and dealing with the estate, and there's still lots of stuff to be done, which I have to do, and I'm a bit behind on. So I found that incredibly difficult to do. Having said all that stuff about grieving about my daughter, it's a hard place to be wherever it is, wherever grief lies. Although, the loss of Maude was cataclysmic, and losing my father was incredibly sad. He was 90 and he'd had a wonderful life, and we loved him very much, and it was in the natural order of things. So you always end up looking like your dad, don't you? And I would see a lot of my old friends from school, my old football team in Hounslow, and all of them looked like their dads. And when I arrived, I walked in, they were all there. So I was, a few minutes later, I said, "Oh gosh, am I in the care home and not the pub?" Which went down really well, actually. I don't know if that's an appropriate joke, but anyway, it went down well. But they all look like their dads. So you're heading there. And then, of course, you are going to sort of slide off the end. I mean, I hope I'm a reasonably emotional person and also quite a practical person, equally organised and disorganised, but I suppose open, and I'm trying to be honest with how I feel. So irrationally, I know, I am certain that I'm going to see Maude when I die. So I am. It's just going to happen. I've decided that is going to happen. And that's a really wonderful feeling. And it's utterly illogical. But I will. I mean, when people pass away, they know, I say, or their child, they'll be saying, sitting up there on a cloud, looking down at us and laughing. I mean, there might well be, but who knows? But I feel even more strongly that I will see her, and I'm not a particularly religious person. So that's a kind of comfort, because I need it. I suppose I've manufactured it because I need that comfort, because it's scary passed away. Again, I hope I'll do everything practically. And now what I really want to do is I do want to tell my children my experience of life and what has helped me and what I value. And I'm lucky that, I hope this doesn't sound too pompous, but I've done one or two bits of work that I've been so very proud of. And I hope that, they can look at that and go, gosh, the possibilities of what one can do by doing something you love and doing it well. That's work, of course. And then, life and other things. And gosh, I've made mistakes, I've done some good things and bad things. One's never perfect. But I'd like to share somehow, and I'm still working on that, how I would do that. Whether I just write them all down in a little book and just leave them and write something that I don't take everybody seriously. But there it is. We talk a lot anyway. My older boys, I'm thinking of particularly at the moment, as young men, it's a hard journey at the moment, I think, for young people. So we always talk about stuff and coping mechanisms and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so my sense of mortality is tempered a little by being able to pass on things, not monetarily, but, spiritually, I suppose. And I'm less fearful of death than I used to be, actually. I'm awful at risk. You never ever see me on a funfair. I'll never go on a roller coaster, and I'm risk averse, and I'm taking a lot of risk at work, but you're in a secure environment, I suppose. But I'm risk averse, in part because of Maude. I always catastrophize things as well, so that's why I'd never go in because I thought I'd die on a roller coaster, and I hate heights and things like that. But passing away, I'm less concerned about it now, and I think, if I were to be, if it were imminent, I'm thinking about somebody else we've just heard about has been struggling with cancer, actually, which I didn't know. If I, put myself a little bit in, how can you, but what he must be thinking and how hard that is, I think I'd still feel the same way. I'd still want to let everybody know that I love them and that I could pass something on to them and face whatever was coming with a sense of reciprocal appreciation and love. It's so easy to use the word love, but it really is everything, isn't it? Warmth and love and care, isn't it? And compassion. I think compassion is my favourite word, not in a, Clinton cards way, but in a real sense. And we talked earlier about even practical things. That is showing compassion. So reciprocal compassion is so important. And I think if I was raging against the dying of the light, I would be I wouldn't be raging. I think I'd be happily moving that way. So yes, it's easy, isn't it, to think, I'm less fearful of dying, but when you actually think about it, and perhaps that it was round the corner. That would be my way, I think, of trying to find meaning and comfort and all those things. It's very hard, think about my father, he was adopted, and, he didn't know his father, or knew his birth mother, who I never really met. So I hope we gave him a bit of, comfort towards the end of his life. And we certainly were able to talk to him. I spoke to him on the day he passed away in the afternoon. I didn't think he was going to die, actually. We thought he might even go back home, but it happened quickly and we weren't there. But we were there soon, relatively soon before. And we got to say some nice things and some funny things. So I hope that would happen that would help me with my passing.
Is legacy something that's important to you? Like how you'd be remembered?
Legacy for me is leaving something behind that is meaningful. So I feel that it's memory, isn't it? And when we think about Maude, we think that she's alive in our memory. When Maude died, we had a wonderful counsellor come to see us from the local council. And he said two things. One was, what is death? Which we wanted to lamp him at that because it seems such an obvious thing to say, but it's true. It's what is it? What is passing from one place to another, or what is the absence, and etc. But he also said, that she's alive in your memories, and I'll always remember that. And it's true that. So I would hope that my legacy is something to do with that I'm alive in my family's memory. And I'm lucky because, they'll be able to see me on the telly and see some of the stuff I've done and see me doing that. But I'd like them also to picture me in memory. So that would be my legacy, I think. All the other stuff, it doesn't really matter, does it? You leave a bit of cash, I suppose, along the way, but, if that floats your boat, you've got to make your own, really, haven't you, in a way. But, that everybody knows what I value is a legacy. I mean, I'm going to say something very arrogant and convenient now, but I've got a few awards. So, and they're nice things to have, and it's a very nice feeling to feel that you've been appreciated by your peers, and I'm very, very lucky. But I went to give some Duke of Edinburgh awards. Well, I just wonder why they're asking me. But in a way, you think, well, they are because I enjoy what I do, and this has got me here, anyways. But and I like giving back, and I like helping young people and teaching them as well as doing my work. Anyway, so they said, well, if you could bring something along, please do so. Of course, I bought my BAFTA for Best Actor, but I also bought a letter that I got from a parent, which was from a father, from a husband, and a father of children. And the letter was a little handwritten letter. And he didn't give his name or address. He just said something along the lines of, "Dear Jason, I've been a fan of your work for a long time now, but I just wanted you to know that all the things that you do about raising awareness of sepsis and talking about what happened to you in your life and how that helps me as a father and many other fathers you will never know. Thank you, thank you." That was it. And that's the most valuable item I think I've got, apart from things that my wife has bought me or I bought her, and things that Maude has, and other things that are connected to my children. So the BAFTAs are great, but that is the most valued thing I have. So that would be my legacy. It's what's possible. Who knows whether I've got any effect? I mean, that's one person's opinion. I don't know. I hope so. But just to have something like that. And so, if you want, that's what you can do with your life, and I know I'm talking a lot now, but it's a bit like work sometimes, in that I worked on a job once where the director said, listen, if you want to keep a little book of all your ideas, or a list of smells, or, things that might help you with your character or the way you walk, so to write them all down, or these days you could do it with videos and all sorts of stuff, and make a little collection, do it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I think, I like that. And I sort of occasionally, sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. But it's all about what you put into it, isn't it? You don't have to do. They should go and learn your lines and turn up and hope it sits. You could do all that stuff, and it's kind of it feels very creative. So you don't always have to just fulfill the brief. So the possibilities for things are sometimes a lot up to you. That might be a legacy.
And I know you said at the beginning of this, when we just started talking about legacy, you were talking about wanting to impart information and some of your experiences to your sons and your children. And actually, I think from what you've just described, I just want to say they're seeing it now, Jason, and they're watching and observing and listening and hearing, because I'm sure what you're describing is what they see in action. And I think that's just quite a nice thing to remember. Anyway, my last question is, how's it been being on this podcast today?
Oh, I love being on the podcast. Yeah, I could talk about it forever, as you could probably tell. It does engage your mind. It's a sort of poetic process in a way. I would say in some ways, because you're trying to go to the very edge of your imagination, and you try not to come up with lots of platitudes. You really try to explore in your excellent questioning and your listening, Jason, is that you're able to talk quite deeply, I hope, about things, and hope that connects with people. That's what we're doing this for, is to connect with people, offer comfort and context and meaning and all those things at a time that is very difficult, and also hopefully to inspire people to support the work of Marie Curie. So, it's nice to be able, because sometimes you're doing quite soundbitey things because you don't have time. But it's always nice to have time. So it's been wonderful to be able to talk deeply about what I care about, and to recall Maude particularly, and to share a bit of my life, and hope that does offer some comfort to people.
Well, Jason Watkins, thank you for joining me on the Marie Curie Couch. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences, which I am sure will have an impact for those listening. And thank you for sharing some of Maude and her story, and your other children and the rest of your family. And it's been lovely to meet you.
Oh, and you, Jason. Thank you so much. So lovely to talk to you.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie Couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help. From planning ahead to coping with bereavement, you can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 090 2309 or search Marie Curie online. The podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Sound and Vision. The music featured is Time Lapse by Pan-Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.